A quiet drive turned into something I never expected. One shared truth changed how I saw my brother, myself, and the road ahead forever. Before we begin, I'd love to know where you're watching from. What city or state are you listening in from today? And if stories like this speak to you, please consider subscribing to the channel and giving this video a like. It truly helps more than you know, and it keeps these stories coming. Thank you for being here. I remember the day clearly, not because anything dramatic happened on the surface, but because something shifted inside me. The kind of shift you don't notice right away, like a slow change in weather that you only realize once the air feels different in your lungs. I was driving west on a 2-lane highway, the kind lined with old trees that had seen more years than most people care to count. Late afternoon sun slanted through the windshield, catching dust in the air and turning it into something almost gentle. I had offered my brother a ride without thinking much of it. He'd called that morning, his voice hesitant, asking if I was heading toward town. I was. So I said yes. My brother and I have always been close, though not in the talk every day kind of way. More like the kind of closeness that comes from shared history, from growing up in the same house with the same rules and the same quiet expectations. We're both well past middle age now. Life has worn us in different places, but there's a familiarity between us that never really faded. He got into the passenger seat with a tired smile and a paper cup of coffee he picked up along the way. He smelled faintly of engine oil and peppermint. As we pulled back onto the road, the conversation stayed light. Weather, traffic, how fast everything seems to change, and yet somehow stays the same. The kind of talk people our age fall into easily. But there was something else there. I could feel it the way you sense a storm before the clouds show themselves. He kept glancing out the window, tapping his fingers against his knee, then stopping as if he'd been caught doing something wrong. About 20 miles in, the road straightened, and the silence stretched longer than before. It wasn't uncomfortable, exactly, but it was heavy. I turned the radio down a notch and waited. Years of being an older sister had taught me when not to push and when to simply make space. He cleared his throat. "I didn't just need a ride," he said quietly. I kept my eyes on the road, but my attention sharpened. "All right," I replied. "I'm listening." He took a long breath, the kind that comes from deep in the chest. The world outside moved steadily past us, fields giving way to low hills, shadows growing longer as the sun dipped. "I've been carrying something for a long time," he said. "Longer than I should have." There was no panic in his voice, no drama, just honesty. And that, somehow, made my hands grip the steering wheel a little tighter. He told me about a choice he'd made years ago, one that shaped the way he saw himself, but that he'd never spoken out loud. It wasn't scandalous. It wasn't the kind of secret people whisper about. It was quieter than that, a regret mixed with relief, a path not taken, and another taken out of duty rather than desire. As he spoke, I realized how rare it is, especially for men his age, to say these things, to admit uncertainty, to name feelings without trying to fix them. I didn't interrupt. I didn't offer advice. I just let him talk while the road hummed beneath us, steady and sure. In that car, between the familiar creak of the seats and the fading light, something softened between us. When he finished, he looked at me, really looked at me, as if bracing for judgment. Instead, I felt a surprising warmth rise in my chest. Not because I had answers, but because he trusted me enough to share the question. "Thank you for telling me," I said. And I meant it more than I could explain. We drove on after that, the silence different now. Lighter. The sun slipped lower, and I thought about how life doesn't always change in big moments. Sometimes it changes in a car, on an ordinary road, when someone finally decides not to be alone with their truth anymore. We didn't speak for a few minutes after that, but it wasn't the kind of silence that asks to be filled. It felt earned, like we crossed a small bridge together and were now letting the view settle in. The road curved gently, following the shape of the land. Old barns stood back from the highway, their paint faded into colors that only time can make. I slowed a little, not because I needed to, but because something in me wanted to hold the moment where it was. I had the strange feeling that if I drove too fast, I might miss something important. My brother shifted in his seat. "I wasn't sure you'd understand," he said, almost to himself. I glanced at him, then back to the road. "Understanding isn't always the same as agreeing," I said carefully. "But listening doesn't cost anything." He nodded. His shoulders dropped just a little, as if he'd been holding them up for years without realizing it. He went on, filling in the spaces he'd left open before. He talked about growing up, about expectations that weren't spoken but were always there, about doing what was needed instead of what felt right. As he spoke, I found myself thinking about my own life, the ways I'd made peace with choices by telling myself there was no other option. The car became its own small world. Outside, the sky deepened into warmer colors, oranges and soft purples layered like memories. Inside, the air felt closer, not crowded, just present. I noticed details I usually ignored: the faint rattle in the dashboard, the way the steering wheel was worn smooth where my hands rested most. At one point, he laughed softly. Not a joke, really, just a sound of release. "Funny thing is," he said, "I didn't realize how heavy it was until I started talking." I smiled, though he couldn't see it fully. "That happens," I said. "We carry things because we're used to them, not because they're light." He looked out the window again, but this time his gaze seemed steadier. "I guess I was afraid that saying it out loud would change how you see me." That landed somewhere deep. I thought about all the years we'd known each other, the arguments, the holidays, the long gaps between phone calls where life simply happened. "You're still my brother," I said. "That part hasn't changed." What I didn't say, but felt clearly, was that something had changed for the better. Not in a dramatic way. More like adjusting the focus on a camera and realizing the picture is sharper than you thought. We stopped at a small roadside place for coffee, the kind with a handwritten sign and a bell on the door. Inside, it smelled like fresh bread and old wood. We sat at a small table by the window, steam rising from our cups. For a while, we talked about nothing important at all. The weather again. A baseball game we both half remembered from years ago. But underneath it, there was a new ease, a sense that we didn't have to dance around each other anymore. As we got back into the car, night settling in gently now, I felt a quiet gratitude. Not for the secret itself, but for the trust behind it. For the reminder that even after decades, there are still parts of the people we love that we're meeting for the first time. The headlights cut a clear path through the dark, and I drove on, feeling older and younger at the same time. Older for knowing how rare moments like this are. Younger for realizing that growth doesn't stop just because the years keep adding up. The night stretched out ahead of us, the road now a narrow ribbon of light framed by darkness. There's something about driving after sunset that invites reflection. The world quiets down, distractions fall away, and thoughts seem to speak more clearly. I felt the clarity settle in as I guided the car forward, mile after mile. My brother broke the silence again, but his tone had changed. It was steadier now, less guarded. "I don't talk about this stuff much," he said. "Most people don't really want to hear it." "Sometimes," I replied, "people don't know how to listen. That's different." He considered that, nodding slowly. He told me how, over the years, he'd learned to present a version of himself that fit neatly into other people's expectations. At work, with friends, even with family. It wasn't dishonest exactly, but it wasn't complete either. Hearing him say it made me think of how many of us do the same thing without ever naming it. I shared a little of my own story then, not to compare, but to meet him where he was. I spoke about moments when I'd chosen the sensible path because it seemed easier, or because it was what others expected of me. About how, later on, I sometimes wondered who I might have been if I'd been braver sooner. He listened the way I'd listened earlier. Quiet, attentive, respectful. That felt important. Balanced. The car hummed along, steady and reliable, like an old friend. We passed through a small town where porch lights glowed warmly and a single street lamp flickered at the corner. It reminded me of where we grew up, of evenings when the world felt smaller but safer somehow. I think, he said after a while, that telling you was my way of finally accepting it myself. That stopped me for a second. Not enough to slow the car, but enough to shift something inside. Acceptance doesn't come with a deadline, I said. You're allowed to arrive at it in your own time. He smiled at that, a real smile this time, not the tired one from earlier. I'm glad it was you in the driver's seat tonight. So was I, though I didn't say it right away. There was a quiet responsibility in being the one trusted with someone else's truth. It's not about fixing anything. It's about holding it carefully. As the miles rolled on, I noticed how relaxed he seemed now. The tapping fingers were still. His shoulders rested naturally. The tension that had filled the car earlier had dissolved into something calmer, more grounded. We talked about the future then, not in big sweeping plans, but in small, realistic hopes. Staying connected, not letting time slip by unnoticed. Showing up when it matters, even if it's just for a drive. When the first signs for our destination appeared, I felt a surprising mix of relief and reluctance. Relief that we'd made it safely. Reluctance because I knew moments like this don't announce themselves ahead of time, and they don't repeat on command. I slowed as we approached the edge of town, the familiar streets coming into view. Whatever he'd shared, whatever I'd learned, I knew this wasn't an ending. It was a turning point. One of those quiet ones that doesn't make noise, but changes direction all the same. I parked near his place, the engine idling softly. Neither of us moved right away. The night wrapped around the car, calm and unhurried, as if giving us permission to sit with everything that had been said. And in that stillness, I understood something clearly. Growth doesn't always come from dramatic events. Sometimes it comes from a shared drive, an honest conversation, and the simple choice to listen with an open heart. He finally reached for the door handle, then paused. "Thank you," he said again, softer this time, as if the word carried more weight now that everything else had been said. I nodded. "Any time," I replied, and I meant that too, knowing that any time doesn't always mean another drive. Sometimes it just means being available in whatever way life allows. He stepped out into the night, gave a small wave, and disappeared toward his place. I waited until his door light came on before pulling away. Old habit, old care. As I drove home alone, the car felt different. Not emptier, just quieter in a new way. The radio stayed off. I wanted to sit with my thoughts, let them stretch out without interruption. I thought about how many years I'd known my brother, and how easy it is to assume we already know the people closest to us. We file them away under familiar labels.